Good morning. So if you didn't join us for part one of the Is College Worth It series, you should be able to go back to our website in our PCPR University and see part one, which was outstanding. We delved into the topic, the stats, and the metrics of what is actually happening with the return on investment for college education. We tipped a little bit into the concepts of credentialism and what is happening in that space. And so I'm really excited about today because today we're going to dive a little deeper into the more local or regional aspects of the return on investment in college. And I'm really excited to first introduce Katie to you. Katie is coming to us from Pew, and I really think that you're going to appreciate the research that Pew has invested in to bring us some really good information and statistics around some of the education space in the city of Philadelphia. Katie, are you ready?
I am. Thank you so much, Kenneth.
Awesome. So I bring to you Katie Martin. Thanks, Katie.
So since 2009, Pew has released the annual report on the state of the city. So we're using data to tell the trends about the story of Philadelphia. So where the city is now, where it's been, and where it is going. With 15 years of reports, we're better able to look at trends over time, what has really changed and what has really stayed the same in the city. As of 2023, it's a mixed story in the city. We have a Philadelphia that's facing really significant challenges, particularly when it comes to health and welfare, but we also have a city that has a really great opportunities ahead of it. So let's look at some of the different aspects of the data. So one of the first data points I'm often asked about is our population. So the city's population shrunk by nearly 22,000 residents in 2022. This is the second year of decline. However, I will, and I've said this a couple of times, I will say it's really too early to say if this is a definitive trend. A lot of cities were impacted by population decline as a result of the pandemic. And so we need a couple more years of data before we have a better sense of this. But you see all of this population growth that happened from 2006, a lot of that was driven by immigration to our city. So currently at 15%, our city has the highest percentage of foreign-born residents since 1940 in Philadelphia. And the foreign-born residents who are coming to our city, they're coming from all over the world. Right now, our immigration is dominated from people coming from Asia and from the Americas to Philadelphia. Poverty rate. So although it is still very high compared to other cities at 22.8%, it is the lowest poverty rate in Philadelphia since 2000. And that has been a real decrease. I am very curious to see what's going to happen as the pandemic-related funding has ended, and so when we get a couple more years of data, we'll see if this jumps back up. But right now, it's a positive increase. However, I will say, you can see here with the deep poverty rate, and just put that in context, this is a family of four making no more than $12,875 a year. That's remained very stable at more than 1 in 10 Philadelphia. And then when you disaggregate poverty by race and ethnicity in Philadelphia, some Philadelphians are much more impacted. So overall, Hispanic Philadelphians have the highest poverty rate at 30% of residents living in poverty. Employment is returning to the city. So last year we ended with an average unemployment rate of 5.9%. In December 2022, our unemployment rate ended at 4.5%. So to put this into context, when you think about the monthly unemployment rate, it rose to 17.1% in April 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. 4.5%, that's the lowest monthly unemployment rate since 1990. So it's a huge decrease over that period. And the number of jobs grew in the city by 6.7% in 2022. That's nearly 2.5 percentage points higher than the national job growth during that same period. And jobs, they really did increase in every single sector except for government. They went down very slightly in government. And that included a 24% growth in leisure and hospitality jobs. So that was really one of the sectors that was most impacted by the pandemic, and really saw 24% growth during this period. However, many people who were using public transit to go to work no longer are in Philadelphia. So SEPTA took a really major hit in ridership during the pandemic. The change in ridership from 2019 to 2022 for SEPTA, for like the city SEPTA, was 48% drop. For regional rail, it was a nearly 60% drop, and for PACCO, it was a 56% drop in ridership. Since the pandemic, yet to be seen whether or not these will continue to rise in 2023, or if we'll see kind of a new plateauing for ridership in public transportation. Moving on to housing. So this map, we compared how home sale prices from 2012 to 2022 by zip code. So over that period, the median home sale price citywide, so when you're looking at all the different zip codes in the city, it increased from 120,000 to 225,000 over that period. The most significant increases were really in some of the zip codes that had some of the lowest property values. So 19139, 19132, and 19121. And I'll just, to put into context, the real impact that this will have on people who are trying to enter home ownership in Philadelphia. So in 19139, property values went from $35,000 in 2012 to $125,000 in 2022. It's a 257% increase. 19121, they went from 54,000 to 185,000, which is a almost 240% increase. And 19132 from 20,000 to 62,000 during that period, which is a 203% increase. There is one zip code where property values went down. It already had very high values. That was 19102, right here in Center City, around City Hall. And they went from 1.3 million to 906,000 during that period. Looking at sales, so overall, these are all the residential units that are sold in Philadelphia. In 2022, at nearly 25,000 residential sales, it was the highest number of sales since 2008. So right before the recession hit, this is the highest numbers of sales since that period. And we kind of, I'm curious to see what the numbers will happen in 2023 with rising mortgage rates. But as of right now, last year, highest number of sales that we had. But however, we disaggregate home ownership rate by race and ethnicity, you see kind of these changes over time. And this chart examines them. So Philadelphia overall, we have a 57% home ownership rate. That's much higher than many of our other cities, particularly when you're looking in the Northeast corridor. However, you see some differences on home ownership. Asian households have the highest home ownership rate at 62%, whereas Hispanic households have the lowest home ownership rate at 49%. Philadelphia, again, is a little bit different than many other Northeast cities in which home values are a large portion of the wealth for our residents. And home ownership remains high, partially due to our lower home values. As you see, those are rising kind of very significantly throughout the city over the last 10 years. And I will just kind of put out a plug. Pew has done a lot of work and research in home ownership. And my great colleague Octavia Howell is looking into that. We have some work coming out about home purchasing. So like who is buying homes in Philadelphia? That'll be coming out in the fall. I'm very, very excited for. Moving on to renters. So the Philadelphia median rent for a 2-bedroom unit in 2021 was $1,239. Higher than the national average, but still much lower than some of these other northeastern cities that we see here. However, nearly 49% of Philadelphians are cost burdened. That means people who are spending at least 30% of their income on housing. And we are around the middle of these comparison cities, but I will say, like, this we're talking 55% to 45%. Like that's nearly half of people who live in all of these cities are spending at least a third of their income on their housing, on their rent and their utilities. It really limits the amount of income that people can spend on kind of anything else to be able to live. This looks at where cost burden renters kind of live in the city. And I will say that over the past decade, the greatest increases in the number of cost burden renters were in the Bridesburg communities and in eastern North Philadelphia, while Roxborough over here had the largest decrease during that time. Moving on to median household income. So our household income has risen to $52,899. It's up 11% since 2019. Although it really is important to note that this is not equitably experienced by all Philadelphians. So again, when we disaggregate income by race and ethnicity, you can see there's major differences in income. There's a 40% or $40,000 difference in the median income for white non-Hispanic households and Black non-Hispanic households in the city. And you can see the changes over that time period. Some groups of Philadelphians had greater increases from 2019 to 2021 than others. This is an analysis. We divided all Philadelphians into thirds by income. And we wanted to see how the income changed for those thirds from 2005 to 2021. So since 2005, and adjusted for inflation, the median income for the top third of residents, it's gone up by 22%. So you can see from $126,000 to $153,000. For the bottom third, it has been flat, basically flat. It's a 6% increase over from 2005 to 2021. Even middle-income Philadelphians only saw a 13% increase during that time. So what you really see here is, like, as a ratio, income in Philadelphia has gone up for the top third earning Philadelphians and has gone down for the middle and bottom third earning Philadelphians. Moving on to some of the education findings we have here. 40% of 3- and 4-year-olds are enrolled in pre-K programs. This is down 10 percentage points since 2019. We will see how the data changes as we get further out from the pandemic. A lot of like young children were pulled out of school during this period. I have young children who were pulled out of their daycares at this period. But you can see as Philadelphia, we are just at parity with the national average at this point. Whereas a lot of these other cities that have kind of funded programs, in addition, I know Washington, D.C. in particular has a universal pre-K program, and so 73% of their students are, or their 3- and 4-year-olds are enrolled. K through 12 enrollment trends. So this top line here are district students, charter students, and Catholic school students. Of these three categories, from the 2019-2020 school year to the 2022-2023 school year, there are 16,000 fewer students enrolled in these schools in Philadelphia. It's an 8% decline over that period. And you can see there had been a steady decline in both district and Catholic school students. The decline in the number of charter school students has kind of just really started with the pandemic. College matriculation rate. So we look here at, we wanted to see whether or not there was a difference from like the last school year of the pandemic to like the middle of the pandemic of students who were enrolling the fall following their graduation into college. And you can see it stayed pretty much the same. So, you know, almost 50% of school district students are matriculating into college the fall after they graduate from high school. But you can see the real differences in the types of high schools that the students attended. So the students who attended criteria-based high schools, nearly 80% are enrolling in college following fall, whereas the students who are enrolled in neighborhood high schools, only about a third are enrolling in college in the following fall. Moving on to college degrees. So you can see among Philadelphians, at least who are age 25 and older, 35%, just about 35% now have a college degree or higher. This is the first time that Philadelphia has matched the national rate, which is 35%. This map shows where those Philadelphians live who have a college degree or higher. You can see in parts of Center City, more than 75% of adults Philadelphians have at least a bachelor's degree. In vast stretches of the city, that is not the case. So I will point out 19102 in this neighborhood here, 91% of residents who live in this neighborhood have a college degree, whereas in 19133, only 5% of residents have a college degree. This is my last figure I want to show. It's a little bit complicated, but I think it's really interesting to walk through. So we looked at the top 5 occupations for Philadelphia educational attainment, and as well as so you can see here it's divided into the type of jobs that people got depending on the college attainment that they received. So overall, that's into the first 2 cohorts. So Philadelphians with less than a high school degree or with a high school degree or equivalent, they have similar work profiles. So many of these occupations are fairly the same as laborers, freight, home health aides, drivers, sales workers, truck drivers, among the top 5 occupations for those groups. You can see among residents with college education or with an associate's degree or some college, they work much in like customer service roles or nursing roles, and then you can see Philadelphians with a bachelor's degree or higher, teaching and nursing professions were often what the top occupations are. I will note for Philadelphians with less than a high school degree, this median income it's lower than the poverty rate for a family in Philadelphia. So I think it's just really important to point out that you saw similarities on the types of occupations. However, if you do not receive a high school diploma, your income is definitely lower than the poverty rate for a family of 4, which is $25,855. So again, there's a lot of other figures in our report. I'm happy to answer any questions. You can also email me or visit our website, pewtrust.org/state of the city to look at the report yourself. And thank you so much for having me.
Katie, thank you so much for that. I am going to ask you to do one thing. So I noticed when you look away from your screen, we can't hear you. And the last screen that you did, it was very difficult to hear. So would you mind, because when you look down at your notes or whatever you're looking at, then we can't hear you. So my apologies, but would you mind just going over that last screen briefly one more time so we can hear you?
No problem, and I am really sorry about that. So what you can really see here, these are the top 5 occupations by educational attainment for Philadelphians. And so you can see there are a lot of similarities in the types of jobs that Philadelphians had. For Philadelphians with less than a high school degree or a high school degree or equivalent, you can see similar work profiles with some college or associate's degree. You can also see similar work profiles with customer service roles and nursing roles, and then with a bachelor's degree or higher, the top occupations are nurses and teachers and attorneys and judges, etc. But my point on here was that if you don't have a high school degree, your median income is below the poverty rate in Philadelphia, and just the real impact that has on families and their ability to thrive in our city is tremendous, even if the occupation profile is similar, the incomes they are receiving are depressed.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so before we move on, I do want to open it up briefly for questions. And just to give you an idea, we are going to take questions now, but after our update and presentation from our next presenter, we're also going to take questions at that point for both presenters. And so does anyone have anything that they'd like to ask, share, burning questions? That research is insane. That whole data set is incredibly, you can see from each aspect of how it affects college, how it affects education, housing numbers, employment numbers, all of those things impact education in big ways.
I have a quick question, Candace, if I could. This is Cheryl
Good
Mobley
morning,
Simpson.
Cheryl.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Happy to be here. Just a couple of really quick questions regarding the housing chart. Does that chart take into with the housing sales? Does that chart take into consideration the houses that are sold by the city as well through the back taxes issue that we have? So many of these issues that are happening that are leading to housing instability that of course has implications for education, or are they just private sales that you're charting?
These are all home sales. So this data was from Kevin Gillen, who is a researcher at Drexel University. He gets his data directly.
I can't hear you again.
I am so sorry about
That's
this.
okay.
Let me know if you still can't hear me. So
That's better.
This data comes from Kevin Gillen, who is a researcher at Drexel University. He gets the data directly from the city, and it includes government sales as well.
Okay, and
It's
so
all residences. It wouldn't be. There's no commercial sales included in that data.
So the other question is there anybody in your space that's tracking the children that never came back into the classrooms? Like, how does that factor into your charts with regard to populations in these schools? Because there's a significant number of kids who nobody seems to be able to find. So is there any effort underway to at least try to make us some kind of inroads regarding that, or are we just dealing with the kids that we can put our hands on?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point. I mean, the 16,000 fewer students in these schools, I don't know if they are enrolled in other schools, if they went to private schools, if they're just no longer in school, or if this is a population. I mean, overall, the number of students who would be in K through 12 schools is declining from where it had been. Like, it's just a smaller generation than the one before it. But that's a large increase over that period. And I think the answer is I don't know right now. And I think that is something that there does need to be more research in. Where are these students? And where did they go? It's such a good point, Cheryl.
And is there, just as a follow-up, are you having discussions with regard to how human trafficking is playing on this with regard to our younger students? These kids are just like disappearing off the face of the earth, seemingly.
Yeah, we are not looking into that, but I do know the DA's office has a unit that looks into human trafficking pretty significantly. I know that, and they had like a Stoneleigh Fellow not that long ago. And so it's not an area of research for Pew, but I do know that there are other organizations in Philadelphia that are looking at that.
Katie, thank you so much.
There's a question in the chat. I'm sorry, Candace. Phoenix asked a question in the chat. She said she saw an article that stated that Philadelphia was one of the few cities where it is less expensive to own than to rent. Is that in line with your research? And is there any reason for this that the data can show?
I mean, so I saw that article. It was in the Inquirer with, I think it was a Redfin study. And yes, and part of that is our lower home value. So that is less expensive for overall for Philadelphians to own a home. I think the problem is buying that home is still very expensive. So if you already own a home, if you have a home that's been passed through your family, it is less expensive to maintain that home, to pay that mortgage, than it is to to rent an apartment in Philadelphia. But if you have to purchase that home, if you have to put that down payment, if you have to pay those the real estate transfer tax and all of that, that is fairly expensive. I will say, I'm putting a plug in for our research that we're looking at kind of home purchases in Philadelphia, and just the real challenge, particularly focusing on Philadelphians at 25% of the median home purchase value, and who are they and where are they buying and how are they potentially being pushed out by cash purchases. We will have that research coming out in the fall. I'm really excited for it. I think at this moment, yes, when you look at Philadelphia, it is less expensive if you own your home than if you are renting, but that's if you own your home already. The other thing I'll just point to, we do have some research that came out last year. Gosh, time is a flat circle. Either last year or the year before, on tangled title in Philadelphia. So we did an estimate in which we estimated a little more than 10,000 Philadelphians are facing a tangled title in the city. And so basically that means that, you know, you have a property that was owned by your grandmother, for example, and the title did not get changed if she passed on. And so now you're in a situation where if you need repairs, if you need to get a loan, if you need to enroll into a governmental program, if you don't have clear title, you can't get that funding in order to maintain your home. And that research, and I will point out, Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson put some money towards trying to resolve this issue. There was $7 million to help people be able to resolve their tangled titles. It's very expensive to be able to deal with that problem. It's thousands of dollars to be able to go through the program and resolve that issue. And if you don't have the upfront money, it's going to make, to be able to get a loan anyway, to be able to fix your house can be very expensive to try and deal with your title issues. So I will say, like, that's another part of Philadelphia's wealth, in that there's a lot of home ownership in our city. A lot of that home ownership has been passed down through generations, and so that really needs to be preserved for Philadelphians to maintain that wealth within their families and within the city.
Thank you for that, because I want to make sure we get our next presenter in,
Yeah.
and there are opportunities for questions because Katie is going to hang with us. Katie,
Okay.
I do want you to think through, though, we've got a very wide network of people on here who are from other states and other cities. They all have some vested interest in Philadelphia or connection. So I know the data was good. Do you have any ideas or suggestions on Pew or other foundations or organizations around the country that are doing similar research in others for and about other cities?
With other cities, like Pew is actually one of the few places that puts out a report like this for other cities, but each city has different organizations that are working them. So it really depends which places we're talking about. I know in Pittsburgh, for example, with our friends across the state, they have multiple, the Pittsburgh Foundation and other foundations who are doing some of this work. But I will say for Pew, we do have a national body of work that's looking at a variety of different topic areas. So if people have particular interest in an area, I'd happy to direct them to where there are resources.
Okay, great. So we'll do that as a part of, we'll get people connected to you as a starting point. Awesome. Again, this is a more local zoom in, no pun intended, on our is college worth it? What's our return on investment for college? I encourage you to go back and see part 1, which was a more national scope, but now we're relating things into the region of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. And I bring you Jen Kebea because Campus Philly has done some really great research as well. Jen, are you ready?
I'm all ready. So it's so great to see everybody, and there's a lot of folks on the line that I've met before. So thanks for being here and hearing a little bit more about Campus Philly and our research in this space. Campus Philly has a long history of really tracking college graduate retention in Greater Philadelphia, and we're certainly doing that today and sharing a little bit more about the trends. You're going to see ultimately that our research feeds very much into what Katie just presented too, and there'll be some kind of good crossover and hopefully some really good questions and conversations as we go. Candace, I'll let you know too, I can't see the chat, but if there are questions that bubble up as we go, I'm happy to answer them as we go. So feel free to interject if you need to.
I'm monitoring that for you, Jen. So I'll be right on it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Wonderful. Okay, so here we go. So I want to make sure that everyone on the line has a basic understanding of Campus Philly. We are a 20-year-old nonprofit that was founded in the early 2000s to address the critical issue that Philadelphia was facing at that time. It was brain drain. We were bringing 350,000 plus college students to our region to come to school to any one of our 100 plus institutions every year. However, we were only retaining about 25% of that talent pool. And that was really challenging for a city that had growth goals, that had equity goals, and ultimately had goals around certain industries and industry growth. And so at that point in time, civic leaders, city government, the higher ed sector, and the corporate sector came together and said, what can we do about this? And Campus Philly, as a nonprofit, was born out of that effort. 20 years later, our mission is still very much in this space. We are fueling inclusive economic growth by empowering diverse college students and recent graduates to explore, live, and work in Greater Philadelphia. We want you to come here for college. We want you to stay here, find your fit in Philadelphia, and ultimately find your job and your home here so that we really can benefit from everything that you're bringing to our region. Who we serve at this point in time, we're working with nearly 40 higher ed institutions across the MSA, across the region. We have about 53,000 students that we have direct contact with. We've earned their connections through various events, and they follow us through our newsletters, 40,000 on social media. We also track some other statistics about people who come to our events. We host both entertainment events and career-focused events throughout the year. We've noticed that 70% of the students that come to our career events are students of color, 40% are first gen, and 25% are local Philadelphians. So to give you a little snapshot of who we're serving in this space. Also, a little bit more about our model. For those of you who have been following along with Campus Philly over these last 2 decades, you may be familiar, but for folks who are new, we've got these 3 core areas that we're thinking about: attraction, engagement, and retention. The first piece, attraction, is all about getting college students and college-age people to the region to take advantage of our institutions. The second piece is all about engagement. We want to make sure that you have the opportunity to realize the tremendous assets that Greater Philadelphia has for you as a young person who is moving through your college degree. Our arts and culture, our entertainment, all of those scenes in Philadelphia, but plus, Campus Philly is also producing tremendous resources in this space: digital content, resource guides, information that young people need to be successful moving through their collegiate career into young adulthood. Beyond that, we know the hook is a job. You need to have a job in order to really find your fit and build your life in a given region. And we're supporting students with connections to internships, jobs, and all kinds of resources that support life after graduation. So in a nutshell, this is the work of Campus Philly. This is a little bit more about our partnership map. Our moniker is Campus Philly. We are very regional in our approach, though. So you can see our partners are scattered throughout the city, throughout the surrounding 5 counties, as far east as Stockton University, as far west as Millersville University, and then really, throughout all of the suburbs that surround the city. So let's get into the data. So Campus Philly, I mentioned, has this long history of tracking college graduate retention in the region. And for a long time for Philadelphia, it was a story of growth. We ultimately were only retaining 25% of our college graduates. We are now up over double that amount, and we'll get to that and we'll talk about that. But we need to talk about some of the fundamentals around population in Philadelphia first. So this chart, let me just orient everybody to the chart quickly. It's our population breakdown by age cohort in Philadelphia. You can see right now in the city, the 2 largest brackets, they're the blue brackets in the middle, are the 25 to 34-year-olds. It's the largest age segment that we have in the city right now. These represent the recent college grads that have come through that pipeline and now are building their home in Philadelphia. You can see what the tremendous growth is by looking at the gray bars. The gray bars are that same population cohort 20 years ago in 2000. Now, for me, when I look at this, I see a couple things that are really interesting. One, wow, we've got a lot of 24 to 34-year-olds. That's tremendous. However, look at the population that's coming up, the population, this Gen Z cohort we've been talking about. You've been hearing this is a smaller cohort than the millennial generation that preceded them, and certainly the baby boomer cohort that's aging out of the workforce. There is such a tremendous steep crash when you look at those 20 to 24-year-olds, the people who are currently in college now, and certainly the younger folks who are coming up in their path. We know that this demographic change is going to have implications on enrollments in higher education. It's happening now. We've been talking about the enrollment cliff since these students were born, yet somehow so many higher ed institutions right now are thinking, what do we do about this? We've had 20 years to prepare. Frankly, the pandemic has accelerated this, and the skyrocketing costs of higher education have also really, for us, accelerated this enrollment cliff we're feeling in higher education. But the data has shown this all along. We know that this is going to be a challenge for us. We also see the crash on the other side, that band of 35 to 39-year-olds moving into folks who are in their 40s, much smaller segment of the population in Philadelphia. And that's something for our city to continue to look at as this particular group, this snapshot here, ages. Are they moving out? Are they staying in? This will be something to track closely. So from there, I want to talk a little bit more about educational attainment levels. And Katie provided some of this data early on, and I'm going to break it down in a couple different ways so we can look at this together. So on the left side of the screen, we're talking about the city of Philadelphia. On the right side of the screen, it's the rest of the region. Let's focus on Philly first. So in 2000, so 20 plus years ago at this point in time, we had about 221,000 people that fell between the ages of 25 to 34 years old. Only 27% of those folks had college degrees. Fast forward to present day, or as near as we can get it with the data at this point in time, this is 2021 data. We now have 296,000 people who fall into this age range. And here's the big leading statistic: 51% of these individuals have college degrees. That's tremendous growth over just a short amount of time, 2 decades. When we look at the rest of the region on the right-hand side of the screen there, we see similar growth, although not actually as extreme as it's been in Philadelphia. But we now as a region are over 50% in the college attainment level for this particular age cohort. You might have heard Katie talk about 25 plus, that age cohort, so 25 plus all the way to end of life. Philadelphia just cracking that 35% mark, somewhere in that space. When we look at this concentrated cohort, we're over 50. That's a big deal for a city as dynamic as Philadelphia. And here's another statistic that I'm really, really pleased and proud to share. It's always wonderful to see Philadelphia on the top of a list, of a positive list. And this is about the growth rate of college degree holders in our city, people who have a bachelor's degree or higher. We are outpacing our other comparison cities across the US. So when we think about the growth and the trajectory we've had over the last 20 years, we've had 155% growth in the percentage of people who have college degrees in this region. It's just tremendous, especially when we are benchmarking ourselves against other cities across the nation. From there, we talk about the average earnings by educational attainment level. And again, we're looking at this very specific age cohort, 25 to 34. We're tracking Philadelphia separately from the rest of the region, so you can take a look at the differences here. Some stark differences here. High school diploma, if you are a resident of Philadelphia and you're between the ages of 25 and 34, the median income for you is $26,000 a year, below the poverty line. If we look at folks who have a bachelor's degree in that same age cohort in Philadelphia, the average salary is $61,000 a year. Now, there's some nuance here. These are aggregate numbers. We are not breaking these down based on race, ethnicity, gender. The sample size that we have actually doesn't allow us to do that very effectively. And so we know that there is absolute nuance between, for example, the white male who falls into these age ranges and the Black female who falls into these age ranges. That's something that we need to look at much more closely, and we know that there's such disparity in that space. However, when we look at this at the aggregate, it's such a tremendous difference. Double the salary at the average rate, for sure. And when you look at the intermediary markers, some college and associate's degree, it's actually not that big of a growth. You're not even kind of meeting that halfway part. You're only really raising the rate about 30% in there. So It's something to look at, something to consider here. When you think about the ROI for higher education, the salary levels for people that are in this age range really do speak for themselves. What this doesn't also capture, so many of us now have been getting very close to the conversation around credentialing programs and boot camps. And, some of those programs on paper have the potential to springboard somebody who has a high school diploma into an income category that is much more representative of a bachelor's degree or bachelor's degree plus. My question in that space, one, there's not great aggregate data. We don't understand that collectively as a whole yet in this point in time. I think we need to keep our eye on that. Ultimately, what does that look like? How many people are able to move through those programs? And how many people are ultimately able to continue career growth in those spaces as they move forward? So something to track, something that as a collective, we don't have great data on yet, and something I'm really interested in understanding as we move forward. So now we're going to talk a little bit about earnings and what that ultimately means for the region. As people earn more money, ultimately more money flows into our city and our region. So let's break this down. This chart's got a lot of numbers on it. I'll point you to the important pieces here. So let's focus on ultimately what we're talking about in the 2021 category, City of Philadelphia. Let's take you all the way over to the right-hand side when we talk about the earnings gains. So in total, in the City of Philadelphia, the earnings gains for people who have a bachelor's degree or an advanced degree, a master's degree, a doctoral degree, whatever the case is there, there is now a 5.88 billion earnings gain from this particular part of the population. When we look at the rest of the region, there's actually a similar earnings gain. We're at 5.87 billion. So in total, we're nearly $12 billion of additional earnings because these folks have degrees that ultimately are granting them much higher incomes in this space. So when we look at this again, this is just another really a way of ultimately looking at this, the growth over time of what folks with college degrees and their earnings, what it means for the city of Philadelphia. If we hone in just on the Philadelphia numbers, which are in the green here, back to 1990, we've been tracking this. It was in that $4 billion range of estimated earnings increase. We're now up over 9.7, which is a $5.9 billion increase. It's a lot. It means there's a lot more money moving in and out of the economy. And our economists at eConsult, who have performed this research for us, have controlled for things like inflation and things of that sort. So this is actually real growth and real change in terms of money flowing in and out of our economy. For folks who appreciate understanding a little bit more about where money goes when we get it, you have your direct earnings, this big blue bucket here. This is a little bit more of the methodology that eConsult used to determine these statistics. We think about local household spending, things you purchase and buy to run your life. But then there's also expenses that you have for being a citizen in the city and in this country. You've got taxes, you've got savings, you've got spending that gets directed elsewhere to non-local environments. But ultimately, when you do think about the local household spending and money that's being spent local, there's all of these indirect and induced effects on supply chain and labor income. So what this ultimately means is that by having an engaged and educated group of citizens who are ultimately earning more money, spending more money in the economy, their spend supports other jobs throughout our economy. And that really is where we get into these induced effects in local household spending. Let me break it down a little bit more, because this even for me is starting to go over my head a little bit here. So a couple things in this space, just to wrap up this slide, and then we'll go on to the next one. We're talking about direct earnings. This is summing it up again. City of Philadelphia, 5.9 billion, rest of the region 5.9. We're nearly at 12 billion across the whole MSA. We talk about what that local economic output is and the employment that is supported by the spending of the folks who are earning this money. We're talking over 55,000 jobs across the region that are supported by the earnings that this particular cohort is bringing in. It's 24,000 jobs just in Philadelphia. And we even can understand where those jobs exist, the jobs that are being supported by the earnings and the spending of this particular cohort. You can look at arts and entertainment, other services, transportation and warehousing. People have real jobs in these spaces. Whether or not they have a college degree is secondary in terms of who's actually represented on this slide. But the fact that we have this engaged citizenry in Philadelphia who is earning college degree plus wages, they're able to really support folks that are in these particular professions. So let's talk a little bit about the revenue and tax implications of having this particular group of educated citizens in Philadelphia. In the city of Philadelphia, the tax implications on the annual basis are over $253 million. We also look at the rest of the exchange there across the Commonwealth of PA. But then we know that our folks in this region live in New Jersey and Delaware at all. So we understand that those numbers as well. In total, it's upwards of $715 million of tax revenue, the impact from graduate retention of this particular cohort. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more. Let me actually I'm seeing a lot of chats coming in. Anything that I need to be aware of, Nancy? Any questions?
There are a couple.
Okay, let's.
Candace, do we have time to address any of
Oh,
those? 'Cause
yeah,
I know
let's go for it. Mhm.
Okay. So, the one question I see is, well, one is a comment from Shamik. He said he wished there was a way to package the key metric of earnings across education attainment to dispute media stories which question the value of college. So, Shamik is always thinking in terms of how we better tell the story. Cheryl asks, is there any effort to identify Black students from generational families who attend college outside of your targeted area?
Well, you're getting into a whole other area of question that we are absolutely asking at Campus Philly. The idea of, our young people go to school across the country. They come here for sure, but they also go elsewhere. We may have folks in Philadelphia that are going down south to HBCUs or other MSIs and things of that sort. We at Campus Philly would love to better understand where those students are landing so that we have a chance to boomerang them back into the region. So that's absolutely data that we're looking at. We use a couple different systems to understand that. Lightcast is one of them. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. We're very nascent in that space. And so I actually would, if folks have advice or suggestions on how we best track that, I would welcome that for sure.
Cool. Let me see if there's anything else that was particularly addressing where you are. One went back to in presentation before. I think
Okay.
that's it. The decline of the decline in K-12 match the decline of population. I think that was part of
that was my question.
That was part of Katie. Yeah, that's Shamik.
Responded to Katie. Cheryl had a question about the college fairs, Jen. 70% of students who attend fairs are students of color, according to your presentation. And so Cheryl wanted to know if there was a disaggregation where you could say what percent of color were Black students.
Oh, so they're not college fairs, they're career fairs. So students who are looking for internships and jobs.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah. So what percent of those are Black?
We do have that information. I don't have it in the slide deck. I absolutely do have it. And now we're also tracking the additional modifier of whether or not you're a local Philadelphia resident too. So we can start to disaggregate all of that for people who are coming to Campus Philly events. So I could follow up with that if that's of interest.
Great, thanks, Jen.
Sure, you're welcome. I want to get back into this next set of slides, and I just have a couple more. I hopefully painted the picture of what college attainment looks like in this space. I want to start to talk about the realities of population shift that are upon us. I have been saying this for I've been at Campus Philly now for 2 years, and I've been saying it for probably about 18 months. Generation Z is a smaller cohort. They are a smaller cohort than both their millennial counterparts who are occupying jobs that Gen Z hopes to occupy soon in the workforce, and certainly smaller than the baby boomer generation that's exiting the workforce in this point in time. So this not only has created challenges for us when we think about enrollment in higher ed, and we're seeing that throughout our city and frankly across the country in terms of decreased enrollments. So that's one challenge. But we know that that challenge is going to continue to trickle into the workforce. Just a few, maybe about 6 months ago at this point in time, the Philadelphia Business Journal put out a report that ultimately listed, it was talking about Philadelphia in particular. That newspaper is syndicated across the country and every city was looking at this in a different way. It talked about the number of workers that we are going to be short over the next 15 years because of this population shift. That's ultimately what I'm going to talk about now. We, as it stands, if we do nothing different, we'll be really on track to be short 87,000 workers because of baby boomers exiting at a faster rate than their Generation Z counterparts that are just entering the workforce. When you consider the size of the millennial cohort, it's even more dramatic. So let's look at that data a little bit and unpack it, and then we can talk about some steps forward. So let me get back into this. Okay. So I asked eConsult, our consulting firm, trying to understand this and unpack this a little bit more. What are we talking about when we talk about population shift? How different is this really for Greater Philadelphia? How significantly are we going to feel the squeeze of this population change? So let me direct your attention to the right-hand side of the screen, which is the green slides here. Right now at this point in time, we have 414 plus thousand people who are considered millennials. I'm one of them. I'm an elder millennial. I was born in the early end of this trajectory here. And when we look at Generation Z and we look at who is kind of coming up in the world, they're a smaller cohort. There's only shy of 300,000 of them in the Greater Philadelphia region. So there's a demographic gap of over 115,000 people when you compare Gen Z to millennials. So let's just keep that in mind as we move forward. So when we think about planning for this demographic change as a city and a region, and we're thinking about this for lots of reasons. We're thinking about it for post-secondary planning and enrollment into higher ed. We're thinking about movement into the workforce and what that ultimately means for our region. We need to deploy a whole host of efforts to really make sure we are coming out as a city and a region whole at the end of this next decade. So there's a few things we must focus on collectively, and this is not just solely Campus Philly's work. This is the collective city and region's work. When we think about building local talent pathways, that's our youth that is in school in K-12 education right now, who in Philadelphia, we know matriculate to college at a lesser rate than their peers in other cities across the country. We have to do better in that space. We have to make sure we are focusing on our local talent and thinking about their post-secondary planning. And I know I'm preaching to the choir in this room, but that needs to be paramount. We absolutely need to make sure we are building from our existing cohort that is here in Philadelphia with us. We absolutely need to make sure that we are retaining college students who either matriculate locally into college here or come from elsewhere to decide to go to school here. We need to retain, and we need to retain at higher numbers than we've ever retained before. And the third piece is we are also going to need to think about attracting new talent. Now, the data that we have access to at this point in time will tell us that City X is producing degree holders that we need in our region, and they actually don't have the jobs to support them in their region. And so we can start to pinpoint strategies around attraction. We want to do that with an equity lens. We don't want to do it haphazardly. We don't want to do it in a way that's going to further gentrify our city. This needs to be done with a lot of thought and intention. And so really, for folks that find themselves in post-secondary planning and workforce development, you're going to see yourself somewhere in this pipeline, I would imagine, for sure. So let's dig into this a little bit more. This is really going to talk about Philadelphia and the city educational attainment levels, that 25 to 34-year-old cohort. And this is actually starting to break this down. Oop, I think let me just stop sharing my screen. Let's get back into it. This is going to start to break this down actually by a few other types of demographics. So that full population of 25 to 34-year-olds is represented on this slide deck. We know that 51% of them have a college degree or higher, but there are folks that have less than a 9th grade education, a 9th to 12th grade, but no high school diploma. We have folks that are high school graduate, and we have folks, and this is probably, to me, an area that Campus Philly really needs to think about along with our partners, folks who have some college but no degree and are likely carrying the debt burden of that some college and no degree forward. We need to understand ultimately how we start to advance folks who are in these other types of categories. And you can see in Philadelphia, 16% of our population of 25 to 34-year-olds fall into that category. There's 47,000 people in Philadelphia who have started college but don't have their degree. And I think I've got a colleague from Graduate on the line here somewhere too. So this is a good stat for you and really for your team to keep digging into. That's such an opportunity for us for sure. You know, when we look at folks who have a high school diploma, 56,000, it's huge numbers. We have huge opportunity to do better in the city. When we think about the next slide here, this is really educational attainment rate by race. And so there was a question earlier about this, and maybe this might add some context in this space. So when we think about the part of the pie that each has these types of credentialing, whether it's a less than high school diploma all the way to advanced degree, you can see the breakdown by race across the board here. And I don't think that there's any surprises here. We know that there is huge complex challenges in this space around equity of who is ultimately earning these degrees. So looking across, let's just focus in on that some college, no degree, that huge opportunity segment we have in Philadelphia. 6% of those people are white, 17% are Black, 11% Hispanic, 7% are Asian, and 12% fall into a different category there. That's something certainly to note. We can also look at this through a gender lens. What I'm not able to do is actually juxtapose race and gender. The segment size just gets too small and it's not accurate data, but let's look at gender. So when we look at Philadelphia City educational attainment by gender, again, 2000, the year 2000 is on the left-hand side, 2021 is on the right-hand side, and you start to see what that ultimately looks like as well. You know, I just want to point out a couple things that I found interesting looking at this. When we think about bachelor's degree holders in 2000, we were nearly even split, 17 to 18% male, female. That's actually shifted a little bit. Our bachelor's degree holders with our male cohort is at 34% versus 30% female. However, look at the advanced degree category when you start to understand that 24% of the women in our region who have a degree, have a college degree, actually have an advanced degree in that space. And so that to me was something interesting to look at. It's huge growth from the early 2000s. So I want to talk about a couple other things, then we're going to wrap up and we'll go to Q&A, and I'm sure you'll have questions for Katie in this space too. So we also track college graduate retention, and we track it by school at Campus Philly, and we're able to do that in a way that the methodology has really improved over the last even 3 years. Early on, when Campus Philly was tracking this information in partnership with the city and region, and we're talking back to 2010 when we were starting to look at it, it was relying on high data that higher ed institutions held and looking at data in a much more piecemeal way. And we were able to get to a number, that 25% space that we understood that was retaining in the region at that point in time. Well, technology has continued to grow and advance, and we really have some tremendous tools that are available to us now to understand the data set in a much larger and more complete way. So ultimately, we utilize a tool called Lightcast, and it's a great data tool. It has a lot of kind of economic input in there, educational attainment input. You can look at all of these different things. And we certainly use iPads too, which is the standard reporting space for higher ed institutions to roll their information into. So Lightcast is ultimately able to look at the totality of graduates who have LinkedIn profiles. It's a cohort of over 1 million people. So it's a very large data set. So there is a high confidence rate with this particular information. And as Campus Philly, and putting our lens on this, we were looking at 43 4-year degree granting institutions that are in the Philadelphia MSA. Something that I noticed with Campus Philly's own research prior to me coming on board, we were actually including community colleges in our calculation in the past. That, to me, that's not quite accurate. We're talking about 4-year degree holders. So that's what we're looking at now. Institutions that grant 4-year degrees. We now know collectively, and we can actually tell you school by school as well, that 50.2% of alumni from these particular schools have retained in the greater Philadelphia region. That's a 100% increase, 25 to 50 plus from 2004 when we started this work. Huge growth in the region. And that's further amplified when you see just the population growth in that side, that first slide that I showed you early on. So tremendous, tremendous growth. But what I can tell you is it's not going to be enough moving forward. If we continue to only retain 50% of a much smaller pie, we're not going to get to where we need to be as a city and a region. So what do we need to do? What are some of the call to actions and things that I hope that Campus Philly can support with and that we can join together and collectively support with? First, that build, retain, attract strategy. The building piece, we must focus on the local opportunity here in Philadelphia. There is such opportunity, such talent that we need to make sure have every access to a post-secondary plan that we can possibly get in front of them. We need to really think about retaining the students that choose to come to school in Philadelphia and build their life here. And frankly, the third piece, we need to be more savvy with the attraction. Business attraction and employee attraction happens all of the time. Let's do it in a way that really is applying an equity lens. The second piece here is we need to continue to enhance post-secondary counseling. Our young people need to understand what their options are, what the cost of those options are, and ultimately what that path will look like. Post-secondary counseling is going to be integral, and the work that you're all doing is just so, so important. We also need to see increased collaborations across the K to career post-secondary planning and also the workforce development space. So when we think about really K to career, there's so many people that work in that space. We all need to be talking. We need to be understanding what segment of the population we're supporting, how that intersects. We need to be doing this work better together for sure. We frankly also need increased investment from the city and the state. The city of Philadelphia is absolutely stepping up in spaces they can do more, and the state will have a crisis on its hands if they don't really start to lean into what talent recruitment looks like across the state. Philadelphia is certainly on track to have a worker shortage. Pittsburgh is, as well as all of the larger cities in our state. It's going to be a statewide challenge and certainly could have statewide solutions. We also need increased investment from corporate and philanthropic sectors, people who believe in this work, understand the importance of an engaged and educated citizenry, and folks who are going to step up to support it. We know that higher ed costs must be controlled. This is such a mitigating factor for young people in deciding what they're going to do with their life after high school. We know our higher ed leaders need to be thinking about this much more creatively and much more critically moving forward. We also understand that Philadelphia higher ed institutions must do more to enroll local students. This has been such a poor showing for lots of our different higher ed institutions. They need to step up in this space. We need to see a bigger turnout of our local youth enrolling in local Philadelphia colleges. And frankly, Greater Philadelphia must remain a compelling destination for college students and recent graduates. And there's a whole host of ways that we need to think about that, from health and safety, from amenities, from housing costs, from salary and wages. All of that really collectively shapes and guides the decisions of young people on where they're going to live after they graduate. So I'm going to stop there, and I welcome more questions and comments. This research is just really coming out the door now. We'll be releasing the full report later in July, and we'll be sure that you all get a hold of that. I'm going to stop sharing here. Here we go.
Jen, thank you so much for all of this information. Kate and Jen, this is really thought-provoking and kind of mind-boggling all at the same time. I worked for Philadelphia Academies for almost 30 years, so I worked in the college and career readiness space. So I'm going to throw out a question because I worked with both sides, both the education side and the industry side. And Jen, you were just talking about, retaining students here to work in jobs here, both in Philadelphia and the greater Philadelphia region. How can educational institutions, whether they're the school district on the secondary side or higher ed institutions, what kinds of things can they do to get employers to look more seriously at Philadelphia students and Philadelphia college graduates to fill their positions in the region?
So that's a good question. It's a loaded question. I don't know that I have all the answers, but let me give you a couple points of perspective and some trends that I'm seeing with some of our corporate partners that we work really closely with as they think about their early career talent. We certainly have our corporate partners are deeply connected to our higher ed institutions. They're recruiting at those campuses. They are ultimately there and showcasing their opportunities for career development in that space. We know that kind of exploration and that kind of investment needs to start earlier. And we're starting to see the seeds of that continue to grow in Philadelphia when we think about experiential education at much earlier points in a student's K to 12 trajectory. So I think that's going to continue to be really important. But the other thing I'll add is I have also noticed more and more of our corporate partners being interested in thinking about workforce pipelines direct from community colleges and direct from kind of non-traditional pathways, because they frankly need workers. So the conversations I've seen open up more recently have been positive. We need to have more of them, and so I think this conversation just needs to continue.
Thanks, Jen. Any other burning questions? Like I said, I know that all of this information has really, made everybody think.
I have a question. This is Cheryl Mobley Stimson. I'm multitasking, driving from one location to another, so I can come off camera. I think it's not working. Anyway, here's my question. I've worked at every level of education for the most part. And one thing about education is it has its ebbs and flows, but we always come back to the same thing. Now, a number of the suggestions that you mentioned, things that we can do, some of those things were undertaken by Arlene Ackerman. Some of those things were undertaken by, who was it? Hornfield, was that his name? Can't think of these superintendents' names, past superintendents, but some of them have even been undertaken by the Greater Chamber of Commerce, Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. So my question is, how do we finally get to the point of creating the strategic alliances that are needed, not just amongst the practitioners, not just, with the folk who are working in these spaces, but also on the ground, like people in the nonprofit organizations, people who are, like I have a meeting tomorrow with the Christian Street YMCA. I mean, they've had layers of education kinds of opportunities and, that they have implemented over decades. How do we finally get to the point where we connect up all the dots amongst everybody that has at least, first of all, the interest in pushing these kids forward? And of course, I'm especially asking questions about Black kids because that's who I reflect, but also when it comes to the ills of the urban communities, I mean, that's the population that typically gets slammed first and most. So how do we all do our part with really finally getting to the solutions? Because I'm having a flashback to the 90s. I'm having a flashback to the 80s when I was in spaces where all of these kinds of things were being discussed. I'm former regional director for FIA. Had this part of the region, but of course there were 6 of us. So when we came together for our meetings, these were all conversations that we had then. So I think I don't need to say anything else. I think my question is clear, but And if you don't have the answers now, I would certainly be happy to follow up.
Yeah, it's such a good question, Cheryl. And I think nothing that I'm suggesting here is a new idea, right? These are ideas that so many of you have had already that you've been enacting in your own spaces. So please know that I recognize that. I guess that my second point though, in response to your piece is, I think these kinds of convenings, the convening that we're on right now today, and the possibility that the Philadelphia College Prep Roundtable and other groups like this that are bringing together cross-sector leaders, we need to do more of this, and we need to do more of it with an action mindset. I don't have all the answers. I definitely don't. My lane at Campus Philly is around college student retention. But we look at this data and we see the edges are so connected and intertwined, and we need to be doing this work together in community. Yeah, Keith, you've got anything to add?
No, I mean, I just completely agree with you that this is not a new problem. Many people have been dealing with this for years and years, including everybody in this room right now, and also that needs to be done together. So just completely agree. Thank you for the question, Cheryl.
Yes, Cheryl, long time follower. New in our room today. I appreciate Cheryl, working with her for many, many years. I do want you all to think about your questions. This meeting is not over, so don't think that we're moving away from the meeting. We've still got some really good information that people will be sharing, but I wanted to address a couple things with both Katie and Jen. So first, outstanding. Thank you for sharing what you shared. Jen, you said exactly what I was thinking, and I'm sure what Tom is thinking. What both of you shared and what both of you are thinking about is exactly why College Prep Roundtable exists. We needed a safe space where people could come together professionally and figure out how to do this. And much like Cheryl, I was hearkening back to the 90s when I started in this work, and it's starting to find, things are cyclical, so we have to understand that. I did want both of you to talk just a little bit about, and I think I asked Katie this already, and she's sort of getting resources out into the chat, but Jen, I wanted to ask you, is there a Campus Philly style organization or effort in other places around the country?
There are actually, and actually Campus Philly has had a hand in setting some of these up. So we go out nationally and consult with other cities and locations that are interested in this kind of talent, ultimately retention effort. And it looks different in every city. Just last year, I was in Kenosha and Racine in Wisconsin, and obviously the assets that they have on the ground are different than what we have in Philadelphia. And so that how it will look will be a different mix. But I can also point, within our own state to Pittsburgh. They, within their Allegheny Conference, which is actually a combination of like our Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce and a few other entities there, they have an initiative that's very similar to Campus Philly there. And there are others across the country as well. So I'll also add, Candace, my lens is really on the college student retention and then, thinking about, it moving into the workforce and what that looks like. The conversation around talent attraction is going to just blow up across this country because we are all going to be fighting over the same small generation here. And so, what that ultimately looks like I guess I would say to this group, when you start to hear those kinds of that kind of terminology being turned around, talent attraction, early career talent, they're just talking about your students who are a couple years older. It's the same people we're talking about, and how we treat them and support them and move them through this process. We need to get on the same page about. So. Yeah.
And go ahead, Katie. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Jen. And I was just going to say, we had a report that came out just a few years ago about immigration in the city. And to my point from the State of the City report, we've seen population growth for the first time in years since 2006. And I know that there's been the blip recently, but much of that was driven by new immigrants moving to Philadelphia. And so as we see that immigration laws are changing again, and making it more possible for people to move into the city, we will see what the impact will be on new immigrants moving to the city. But two, that also puts a burden on the school district to be able to provide English language learners with the ability to get through the K-12 system, with providing services to parents who might have more challenges with navigating the system. So that also, it's a real opportunity for new people to move to our city with new ideas and new enthusiasms and ability to create new jobs and new types of companies. But also there are challenges to be able to serve them and be able to make sure that they have the ability to access a quality education in our city. We'll add, again, we have some more research coming out on this. So we had our report a few years ago. In the fall, we'll be having kind of an updated look at a couple of different things in immigration in our city. One, we're doing kind of a chart book that will just update a lot of these figures, similar to the State of the City report, but specifically focused on foreign-born residents in Philadelphia. We'll be looking at the legal status of residents in Philadelphia compared with some other jurisdictions. And then also we're doing a report on immigrant workers and immigrant entrepreneurs in Philadelphia. So what types of jobs are they taking, and what types of businesses are they creating? So just giving a little bit of a preview for some of that work.
Katie, you know what, I'm going to jump in real quick and just echo the second part of the report that we're publishing, which I didn't have time to go in today, does a deep dive on kind of the international student segment and where they're starting their careers across the country and where the opportunity is for Philadelphia to kind of access that pool to meet some of our worker needs. And then we also did a deep dive into the tech and life sciences and cell and gene therapy sectors. So I'm just interested to continue that conversation. And I saw the question from Chris about, you know, what percentage of those foreign-born residents and credential holders can we make pathways to professional degrees? Like that's actually a big question with lots of different answers, because there are ways to harness our recent grads that are coming out and who have the opportunity to utilize their OPT, optional practical training, like where they can work for 1 to 3 years in the US without a visa, or I'm sorry, without the worker visa. And then the sky's the limit in terms of thinking about that. But I'm going to go back to the first point I made, that the strategy around building local talent, we have to focus hard in that space.
Outstanding. Tom?
Yeah, and I think actually I'm going into the chat. I mean, I'm not, the only reason why, because is that Chris or so Kip? Jen, did you just answer Chris's question based on what he wrote in the chat?
I tried to, yeah.
Okay, all right. I wanted to make sure because he put that in there before I raised my hand. So I'm going to go ask the question about this past decade or so, Philadelphia becoming this technology magnet space and growing on that. Are we not seeing that anymore? Is that going away? Because I didn't see that as much reflected in either of your reports.
We have a whole other segment, Tom, that's talking about the tech sector specifically in Philadelphia that we can come back and talk about for sure. But there's a couple things to know in that space. You know, Philadelphia has big goals around growing as a diverse tech hub. Our city of Philadelphia has put out tremendous programming around becoming the most diverse tech hub. And there's really strong organizations working in this space to make sure that that full pipeline is developed, really from K to career, for you know, people of all different educational levels. What I'll say there, though, is the research that we're putting out, and our research is a little dated, because ultimately, even though it's 2021, the workforce is so dynamic and changing, and you know, the reporting on this is actually, you know, talking about, you've heard about tech jobs, so many layoffs and so many challenges in that space. A lot of those kinds of changes have happened at those big tech companies. Actually, we don't have too many of those in Philadelphia. We have tech jobs abound. Every company has a tech job in it, or a tech unit, or a tech, you know, component. But some of those real big companies, we don't actually hold headquarters here in Philadelphia for. But what I will say is the data that we're going to put out into the world ultimately showcases that for every 4 early career talent jobs that are posted in the tech sector, so that's someone could fill that job who is between 0 and 3 years of experience, who has that credentialing, and it's really focusing in that computer science STEM space. We are only producing 1 graduate in the region. So huge disconnect actually around the production of our graduates in the region in comparison to the jobs that were available just recently. And again, that's a very dynamic mix, and we have to keep our eye on what that all looks like.
Katie and Jen, real quick, I'm interested in where else are you promoting the data? Now, Katie, I know Pew just did a huge launch and a promotion and a presentation to lots of stakeholders in and around the city. Jen, I know you are starting to do that. So 2 questions. Who are you already promoting this information to? And then I have a question that I want our group to engage in. So please put in the chat where else this data should be presented, or to whom, right? The data should be presented. Put that in the chat. Or any thoughts that you have. How can we get the movers and shakers? Katie?
I would just say, I would also appreciate if everybody would say that, because I am currently making opportunities to present this data to as many organizations as possible. So we have some additional upcoming presentations to organizations like the Philanthropy Network, as well as have spoken with JEVs, as well as a few other organizations in the city. But I will just say, please, if you want this kind of information provided during a presentation to your organization, I'm available. Like we want to be able to share this, because the state of the city, at the end of the day, is a tool for organizations who are doing their work. It is a tool for you to do your work better, to have the data that you need in order to write grants, the data that you need to be able to better understand the people that you're serving, and that's what this is. So we want to share it widely with as many individuals and organizations who can make use of it in their work.
Jen?
Yeah, and Katie, I would echo what you said in that, we will go anywhere. So please just request, and we will actually absolutely come. We are on the cusp of releasing this publicly. So actually, you are the first people to see this data presented in any kind of forum. So thank you for inviting me to do that. But you'll see the full official report come out in July. And then ultimately, we're working really closely with the Chamber of Commerce to get this out through some of their channels, but I will come wherever. So please invite me. I'll drop my email in the chat. Just send me a note and we'll get some presentations on the calendar.
Outstanding. Well, I want to thank you both. That is, real quick question. Will the reports be available to us?
Yeah, they'll be the Pew report's already public available. You can go download that behemoth. Is it 100 pages? It's pretty deep, isn't it?
Don't print it.
It's
Save a
long.
tree, don't print it.
Don't print it.
Don't print it.
It won't be that long, but it'll be available online. And yes, and we'll make sure that Tom and Candace get it to send it back through the network.
Thank you, Tom. And again, thank you, Katie and Jen. That was really outstanding. It was a great part 2 to what we discussed initially in part 1. And I kind of feel that the environment in the world of higher education is going to be here for a minute on this return on investment, credentialism, who should and shouldn't be going to college. I think I'm going to say fighting that battle, because that's where I am in my head, fighting that battle for a minute. I'm a staunch colleges for everyone kind of person. So, with a caveat, right? We have to do it right and with the right students.